Hello and welcome to the Coach Me to Lead show. Today I'm talking to Mihai Banulescu. Mihai, you live in the US. Maybe people your name is not very, it sounds more like European where I come from than from the US.
I sometimes like to joke that I am more American than I'd like to be. I was born and raised in Romania, and I moved with my dad to California when I was 14. So, my name will be Romanian. I'm full-blooded Romanian, but I've lived in California for most of my life.
And so the most formative years of your youth in the US, like high school and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that could be some might argue that the years before 14 are even more formative. And there's definitely a part of me that growing up under communist Romania is a very unique experience. But whatever was written down on who I am in Romania, a lot of that got written over in the US.
What is, just to give it a go, because you said something there, what is that you think is still there from Romania? From your values, maybe?
Well, even though I grew up in Bucharest, the capital city with, tons of people and not much nature, actually a love of nature. I think it's been kind of dormant in me. And it wasn't really until the pandemic, and actually my Dutch girlfriend before that, who would take me out camping, and I was almost like kicking and screaming as I was going camping. But then during the pandemic, I just couldn't be in the city anymore. So I actually went traveling to national parks and everything for 2 years in my car. And then when I settled, I couldn't go back to Berkeley where I used to live. And now I live a little bit in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas past Sacramento. And I live on 8 acres of, lots of land where my puppy, who might come in here, can run around. So love of nature is one thing. Love of poetry is another thing. There's sort of a deeper culture that has some room for sadness in it. Whereas I would say that American culture is more of an adolescent culture where everything has to be like positive all the time, and it's harder to find that depth.
Yeah, and I was just recently talking with somebody. Everything, I think, what it came down to was about talking about grief and how grief, the importance of grief, and how you could move beyond when you have accepted it, right? So I don't think it has to do with positivity, but it has to do with the acceptance of grief that can take you to action. So I think that's part of the depth that I would be looking for.
Agreed.
So there's a couple of things that's interesting. I think that I find interesting to talk about, but there's two things that are completely separate. First of all, you are now the head of engineering for Coachdotme, and we both work for Coachdotme, so that's good to know. But you also have done a lot of coaching in the past and training, and you started coaching again on the platform of Coachdotme. So let's first go a bit back in history of how you became like the head of engineering. So, and you've been working a lot with Ruby on Rails, with the languages for software. What is so beautiful for you about Ruby on Rails?
Oh, you know what questions to ask to get to my heart. I guess it's in my bio in the Coachdotme, right? So growing up in communist Romania, I was always we were really advanced at math. And when I came to the United States, I was maybe like 3 years ahead of math. And just going into computers was just like a natural thing where I went into college, I went to Dartmouth, and like I didn't even ask questions. I was like, of course I'm going to be a computer science major. And I started taking all these classes. And at the time we were learning C++, and you had to do compilers, which was just like a terrible way to code. And we're also doing hard computing stuff, like how can we recreate Microsoft Word, basically, but better is one of our projects. So I actually turns out that I got a couple of internships, and turns out that I didn't really like that. Um, I didn't like that kind of programming, and because I had really amazing teachers in high school, and in Romania, I basically went into being a high school math teacher, and then I caught a passion for swing and blues dancing, and I just organized and taught around the country, and I was kind of not going to be a software engineer anymore until I learned about Ruby on Rails and Dev Bootcamp, which is the first place where people were learning web development, so a very specific subset of software engineering, in like 9 weeks. I was like, oh, I'm sure I could learn that. I looked into it. Agile also is an important thing that basically makes developers' life happy. And Ruby is actually written specifically for developer happiness. So all of a sudden, instead of this like really dark place that I was looking at out of college, there's this like super happy place over here where people pair program and you really care about testing and TDD, which is amazing. And so I fell in love with Ruby on Rails about 10 years ago. I started teaching myself. I joined companies and so on. I grew a career out of that. And while I was working on my coaching business, I met Kendra. She was my business coach. She was amazing. And we were still talking, but I didn't even realize that the place she had taken over as a CEO was using Ruby on Rails. So when we both figured that out, I first joined on a part-time basis when I was working my corporate job. And eventually she asked me if I could go full time. And I was like, okay. And we're making it work with the resources available. But I'm really excited to be doing this as opposed to that corporate job, to be working for a friend on a much smaller team, mission aligned, because I am a coach and I love supporting coaches.
To the Ruby on Rails, I learned. I don't know how to program on it, but I learned about the software through David Hansen, I think his name is, right? David
DHH, yeah. He's the
Yeah.
founder of Rails.
Yeah. And I follow the books and the things they write from 39 Signals, but now it's just Basecamp. And I like the way that he thinks. I think it has a lot to do because he comes from Denmark, and he's bringing also that part to the software, to the company, to the way he operates. I think, like you describe it, like a happy place. I think that's because I remember compiling C++ and just being very annoyed when just one line was wrong and you had to do it all over again. Oh my gosh.
Yes, success. You only have 52 bugs now instead of 53.
Oh, and so the testing is also an interesting part because I'm working with a couple of clients who are in the software environment, and I've also spoken in a previous episode with Maud, who is also a coach on Coachdotme, and she coaches test engineers and test managers to become like better testers, because it's a separate thing. It's a very different kind of world, just testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have started a small team community for testing on the software, and I like that. I've been talking to a couple of people how you did this. Can you explain a bit how you are setting this up?
The beta testers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget if it was Kendra's idea or mine. I kind of want to say it was hers. As we release a feature, it's not going to be perfect right away. So right now I'm working on a bigger feature called discount codes. Right? So what do we need then? Do we need end dates? Do we need, like customizable codes? Do we need, to track the usages? Do we need them to apply to specific offerings? And then of all those things, how do we prioritize them? So it's a lot of pressure on Kendra and the team, such as yourself, to kind of give me feedback on all of that. So we thought that we would invite users who are really committed to the platform and and to basically just give us feedback. So it's pretty easy to add it's called a feature flag. Basically, you just turn on true or false, and for the 8 people who are in the program, or 9, is it 8? We made it true, and now when they log on to the site, they see a slightly different version than most people, and they get early access to those discount codes. And in exchange, they have basically, their responsibility is to tell me when something's broken or to give me ideas, and I get to listen to them. So it's a little bit like, if our team is right here, inviting them to come hang out right over here where there's some interaction. We also do every other week office hours, so they have more access to me. Is that what you're looking for with the question? Yeah.
Yeah, and what I really like the way that you set it up is because we asked the question through an email to the coaches on the platform saying, do you want to be part of the beta team and beta team? And pretty quickly, a lot of people responded positive. But then you set up like something like a threshold. You had like a small assignment that people had to do before they really were in the beta team. And I like that part. There is like a bump in the road, and you have to do some work to get over it, so that you can determine that they're really committed to this thing. So I like that part, how you set that up.
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that you learned about coding and learned about teaching and then dancing and so on. But I think one thing that I'm interested in too was when you were in I'm not sure what is that. Is it high school? It's a college. In college, you learned about carpeting for low-income people.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, carpentry. Did you see that on my resume or somewhere?
On LinkedIn.
It's a good get. Yes, there was a dreamer around who is just from the community in Hanover, New Hampshire. So New Hampshire as a whole is it's a very rural, kind of poor area. So this guy's dream was to get salvaged wood and like help people with their projects who couldn't afford it. And he inspired a bunch of us young college students to come join, and I learned how to use a chalk line and nail gun and all these things. And one of the projects, for instance, was a roofing. We were helping to fix the roof over someone's mobile home. So it was a trip, because I think at least, but perhaps other college freshmen, sophomores, go in, especially to like prestigious university. We go in, we kind of have this like attitude that the world is there to serve us, right? So any kind of volunteering you can do helps with that. But more importantly, Simon Dennis, the guy who's the place was called Cover, it actually still exists. Corps of Volunteers Effecting Repair, I think is what it stands for, but Cover in New Hampshire. But Simon's attitude was really, really helpful, because I think, and I'll tell a quick story about it. I think the woman whose house we were helping with, like 2 or 3 of us, kind of yelled at us one time because we were stepping on her flowers. And I remember feeling like, how dare she like yell at us when we're like giving her our valuable time? And Simon's like, no, actually, you really shouldn't step on her flowers. Like, just because you're not getting paid doesn't mean that you function by different rules, right? That you're entitled to some entitlement. And in fact, like as a volunteer, because you're doing it out of your heart, you should care extra to make sure that you do a good job, that you stay committed. So that was a lesson that hopefully I began to learn at that point.
Yeah, you put something of that into the profile on LinkedIn. That's why I asked about, because I think that lesson to on one side be humble and see that what you do is really affecting these people. At the same time, you talk about how as particularly as unpaid worker, you should do a better job than somebody who's getting paid, right? So I thought that was because I think it has a lot to do with the short talk that we had before we went live today, was how you liked David Allen's ideas about getting things done. So you coach on productivity.
Yes.
But it says in your profile, it says productivity integrity. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, first of all, an asterisk is that when I think about coaching or how I would like to relate to the world as a coach, I really think One Connected Life is the name I came up with. So, because I've done a lot, I've led connection games, I've gone to energy school, I've taught software engineering, I've done productivity, I've done I forget what other things, but basically I think all of those things are related ultimately, and it's some version of what is my relationship to myself, what is my relationship to spirit, how does that all um, how do I approach life. So productivity I almost see as maybe the one doorway, and it's probably one of the biggest doorway that I have towards transformation that then can actually transform other areas of your life. So I coach One Connected Life, but okay, sure. Well, we'll tell people that I coach productivity because, and then David Allen, I read a lot about productivity, and all of that made sense intellectually, and none of that actually helped me be productive. And what actually, I mean, it's true. Like understanding is the booby prize, right? And what happened is, as I was an incredibly messy, incredibly disorganized dance teacher, I would, go to bed at 3 a.m., wake up at 11, lose relationships because I didn't answer email. I had checks that I forgot to cash. Terrible habits. And then I met this guy, and the way I met him is he was putting on a free email seminar that I signed up for, and then I couldn't make it. So for some reason, and talk about integrity, right? For some reason, I knew that he was doing this as a marketing promo, and I reached out and said, hey, what would be the impact on you if I no-showed to this thing that I signed up for? And he was kind of impressed by that, and we became friends, and we traded, traded different kinds of coaching. But he basically became my mentor in productivity, and he taught me a few things, including the Pomodoro. But then 2 or 3 years later, after we had lost touch, David had moved to Argentina. He reached out to me and said, like, hey, let's catch up. And he tells me, like, I got it. I came up with the best system. And he told me about it, and I was blown away. I was like, this is incredible. Like, we have to bring this to the world. So we spent about 1.5 years trying to bring the productivity game, as he was calling it, to the world together. And then we ended up splitting up, and I continued to do my own version of that. But I really like to say that while David Allen is a great inspiration and he teaches good things, the one who actually really impacted my life is David Brawn, who is my mentor in productivity. Now, about integrity, what's the difference? Actually, so David was kind of coming up with the material, and I was coaching it. I was doing groups of 5 or 6, which is probably still the best method and what I'll go back to doing. But one of the things that we said in the material that David created and I coached was a lot of people are thinking like of productivity as making a list. Like, I got to do this and this. And think about like you have to move from a house to a different house. So it's like productivity would be like, well, let me write down everything that I have to do, which gives you a little bit of a good feeling. But ultimately, what matters is the size of your moving truck. And it's just like, do you have a moving truck? Like, can you just put a bunch of stuff in your moving truck and get it from over here to over there? And I think that's sort of maybe that integrity. Like, I might even call it something like execution, right? So there's planning and execution. If you don't get good at execution, then your planning doesn't matter. So what we would do for our system, David created something called the action, which is kind of like a Pomodoro, but it starts exactly on a half hour. And that is the moving truck. I know that I will be spending 25, actually 23, because you also spend 2 minutes reviewing what you did, which is super helpful, but which is my addition. But basically, I spend 23 minutes doing really focused work, and then I take a break. So if I stack up enough of those 23-minute actions, eventually I'll get to move my whole house over. But it's really putting the focus where it belongs to, on like small action, which is actually ironically kind of the whole impetus behind Coachdotme, right? It's about small habits. As I'm in our training right now, our habit coaching training, and I'm learning about that.
I think that's, and the funny thing is, what I see is that when people start to work with me, in general, they are already doing a lot, and they want to become even more productive, right? So they're already
Yes.
doing so much that I think, oh my gosh, how do you want to add more to that? I think if you're looking at your way of like the connected life, is that it's not just about work, how productive you can become for your work. It's the whole thing, right? So
yes,
what is it, connected life? Because people probably don't understand right away what it means.
One connected life. I'm going to talk about my relationship to myself, and in my mind that has like self with a capital S in a little bit. But it's just, I think you're right that most people who came to me for help with productivity are people who are already super productive. So then what I need to do with those people is teach them how to take a 5-minute break, which seems terrible to them. Like, they're like, no, I can't. I have so much to do. It's like, yeah. Do you think you'll be more effective working like 3 hours straight, or working for 25/5? And it turns out that you're way more productive. People that have said, my clients have said, like 3 to 4 times more productive working in that focused mode. Because what actually happens is that people, first of all, you burn out even throughout a day. And also there's a gift to starting and stopping as long as you can relax in between. So I deal with really hard stuff as a software engineer, and the times when I make the most progress on things, right at the end of an action or right at the beginning. So right before I know that on the clock I'm going to take a break in 2 minutes, so there's a little bit like of extra kick. Or I take my break, I go outside, play with my puppy, come back in, resume where I've said, and all of a sudden now I've made a leap. As opposed to if my brain never had a chance to put things down, I wouldn't. And this is something that my software engineering teacher taught me, and it taught us in college. They said we would get these like hard sets of problems that we had a week to solve, and he said start working right away, because as you're in a shower, the solution to the hard problem will come up. So yes, I think part of being one connected life, and it's funny because I'm talking about it as if it's a productivity tool, which it is, the break, but it's also a tool for being fully human. And David, my mentor, was really super clear. He thought that the meaning of being human was to be human, to actually play and enjoy, and all the work that you do is, the purpose is just to make everything else possible. So you should do as little work as possible to get your goals done, so you have more time to play and be human. So I think that's still, it's kind of hard for me because I am a high achiever, and I get too much of my meaning from getting things done. But at the very least, if I can force myself to take that break, which is hard. I've been doing this for 10 years, and it's still hard every single time to get up when I'm like, oh, but if I just work at it a little bit more. But like, the more I do it, that allows me to flow. So it's like resting is good if you consider yourself a machine that you just want to like maximize out of, scientific, management style. And it's also good if you want to be a fully human.
I completely understand and agree with this part. I think we should work as little as possible to live a full life, so that we have a lot of time left to play or to relax or to recover or whatever is necessary to do. And I think that's so different from what we have been seeing for the last 50 years or so, that in an Anglo-American world, everything is about becoming more effective and squeezing out the last minute or second even, so that people can do more work, so that the company is just having more output. And I think if you look at a person like a resource, or if you're looking as a person like a company to get the most amount of hours or minutes of, I think then you squeeze the life out of a person. And to me, having breaks, but also just trying to figure out, so what is my enough? So what do I need to do to have a complete life? I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, even though it's very difficult for a lot of people to understand, because that's not how we've been taught in school. And every place, everything is trained to do as much as possible to give to the job, for example.
Well, school, funny that you should mention school, because my life's purpose is actually to reinvent education. And I was a high school teacher for 4 years at 4 different schools. And I kept looking for a school that doesn't hurt kids and did not find it. I think there are very few, probably more like free schools. Anyway, the schools were actually created by robber barons who had factories, and they needed compliant, unimaginative workers to fill those factories. So that is very specifically, that's why we have bells, that's why we have a bay, that's why we have like classes and ranks and all this stuff. So unfortunately, our society has moved on past that, and we're all information workers who need to make lots and lots of decisions. So there is a better way, but it makes sense that like the workplace is still and the education system are both stuck in that same position.
What is a good education system look to you like? What does a good school look like to you?
I believe in integral theory, so I'm kind of obligated to say I don't know. The best I found, I think, are free schools like the Sudbury Valley, SUDBURY schools, or at ALC, actually Agile Learning Communities, created by somebody who is really into Agile. Basically, you ask yourself, like, who gets to design learning, and who gets to decide what the topics are. And the farther away that the kids are from that decision, the worse the school is. There are places like Montessori and Waldorf, which people think of like, oh my God, they're the cutting edge. They are not the cutting edge. They're just substituting like milder forms of control. And a lot of times there's a pretend, there's the ladder of student involvement. So you can kind of Google and find it. Like there's some things in there, like we pretend to give students a voice. We give students a small input in decisions. And there's also there's places like the Sudbury School where like kids decide what to do. They decide their schedule. Adults are there mostly, to have human to human conversations and to lead classes when the students ask for them. So.
Yeah, I've been talking to a couple of people lately on my podcast about this topic. For example, a teacher on Windesheim School in the Netherlands, who have an honors program where the students actually create the program, and you determine what you want to learn and how you want to design the way that you want to learn this. And the way that I thought about it was, I wish this was available when I was going to school, right? So this is how I look at a lot of things in schools. You have been, I think, if you look at what you do, is that you have been doing a lot of things, and you say that it's a connected life, but it's only a connected life afterwards, right? So you can look at the thread of your life once you've done all this stuff, right? So something comes along, you think, oh, this sounds great right now. And then afterwards you go like, oh yeah, this was really connected to the previous parts, but you didn't know at the time when you started it. Is that, do you feel like that? Or do you really make conscious decisions for Coachdotme? I start with Coachdotme because this is like the trajectory. This is how my life will look like in the end. How do you see this in an integral way?
Yeah. Well, I think my life, well, yes, of course. I think I am familiar with the concept you're speaking of, and I'd have to agree with it. But I'm curious, what I'm interested in is how do I make that in the moment choice, right? And I think because I grew up in a very intellectual family in Romania and I went to like a very intellectual school, there's this idea of a 6-word memoir. And the first 6-word memoir I wrote for myself is Ivy League computer grad still recovering. So it was because I think academics overemphasizes one very specific form of intelligence, right? Which is academic or like break it down, predict and control intelligence, which is very good for software engineering, incidentally. But it de-emphasizes the rest, right? So how I used to make my decisions is probably to like really like think about it with my brain or make lists and so on. The cool thing that happened in my life is about 13 years ago, I stumbled across the circling and authentic relating community. And I basically just jumped into a community council with the people who were leading the workshops, even though I knew nothing about it. But all of a sudden I was hanging out with people, especially the guys were the ones I connected with, who when they would make a decision, they would pause and be like, let me feel into it. It's like, I'm an athlete. Like my body is for like kicking a soccer ball. It's not for like actually sensing things. But all of a sudden it became over a long time, which definitely involved energy healing school and all this stuff. But like it kind of opened me up to this way where in the moment I have a sense. Now, the more plugged in the more resourced I am in my life, the more clear that inner voice is as to what to do. So, but sometimes I feel real clarity. So sometimes that clarity says, work a corporate job and get out of debt. And, and then that same job says, quit the corporate job and go on the road and do nothing for 2 weeks. And,
I'm one of the topics I'm really interested is decision making. So it's so interesting that you went on this path too. What is, because one of your, I'm going to show the Coachdotme profile on the screen. So here it is, and you can see your package is called ProFlow. How do we play for productive? It probably will change a bit because you're now in the HCC program, and the packages in general just changed. But what does it mean, playful productive?
Well, I tried to capture that it's actually okay to be human part, right? So playfully productive is, the productivity game or the action game are terms I've used before. And ProFlow is something I'm workshopping basically, but really the result of this system is that I'm in flow most of the time, right? So, but the playfully is the goal, is kind of saying that it's a game. So I have or had a website where my clients would track their actions. And as you click on a button and you type in a subject, like what you're doing for that 23 minutes, and before you click commit, you have to manually check a little box that says, I am freely choosing to do this. Because as one of my favorite books, Finite and Infinite Games, says, one cannot play who must play. So in order to be playful, you must have choice. So as a software engineer, even in a corporate environment, I kind of have a choice to, do I work on this now or do I do something else now? But even more, I feel even more freedom now, or it's great for entrepreneurs who are completely a choice. You could be taking 2 days off and going to the river, or you could be working, 12-hour days. But as long as it's a choice, then it's easier to stay present.
Yeah, and at the same time,
everything breaks if it's not a choice. Let me put it that way. The negative case is easier.
And I think that a lot of people feel that they don't have a choice, not just because they are in a corporate job, but in general. Like I work a lot with company owners, entrepreneurs, who they feel that they'd be pressured to do things because of employees, of suppliers, of customers, and they ask so many things of them so that they need to do all this stuff. And it's in the beginning, it's very difficult for them to see that they have a choice to decide to do this or not, right? So they have a choice to live this free life in a playfully way, I think.
And that's actually where it becomes one connected life again, because as soon as you have a barrier, the things that were already kind of in your space stopping you, as soon as you set a goal that you bump into, then it's like, well, why can't I? Why can't I actually check the checkbox that says I freely choose and mean it? And sometimes it's circumstance, but a lot of times it's internal. And it's basically, so I would want to circle. Circling is getting someone's world, right? So it's like, and I have actually done that with clients as well. It's like, okay, I'm going to take off my productivity coach hat and I'm going to put on my general life coach, hat, and be like, so who are you as a human being? How did you grow up that now you have to like grip onto this productivity thing and you can't let go? That's one of the biggest questions of my life is, do I have any worth when I'm not producing for people? I'm still shocked when like a romantic partner will tell me that she likes me better when I'm small because there's more room for her. Like, but what do you mean? I have to like produce and like perform, and that's what the world is telling me all the time.
I love how you explain this. I love how you think and how you explain this. One other thing I think is interesting is you talk about Gotti Wumpling. I'm not sure that everybody knows what that is. Can you explain, please?
Yes. To Kariwampo means to travel purposefully, but without a set destination. And in a larger sense is to kind of unpredict your life. So this is what I love about having a bed in my car. And this started for me during the pandemic. I just needed to be in nature. So I would took like 4 or 5 day trips to Mount Shasta or Santa Barbara from Northern California. And there I met people who were just kind of living full time in their cars, and they seemed happier than I was, basically. Maybe they were, and just doing nothing, just sitting in a parking lot on top of Mount Shasta, watching their dogs chase a ball or something, And I got into that mode where life slows way down, and you're just kind of like, well, what wants to happen? So talk about decision making. It was an amazing practice for me, because I basically ended up moving full time into my car and just going around the US for 2 years. It was an amazing practice, and like, when is it time to move on? And I would first decide when I'm done at the place I was at, whether staying with a friend or a national park or a campground, and then I'd be like, okay, well, now where do I feel like going? Do I drive north or east or south? And I'd be like, okay, let me go east. I don't know, we'll go east for a little bit, and not knowing where I'm going to sleep that night. And there's a constant like listening to life, or listening to my deepest self, which is telling me where to go. And I think that there is definitely a spiritual aspect to Kariwampoling. But it was actually my coach, Michael McDonald, who's amazing, who was kind of listening to my story as I was already starting to do this. And he sent me a YouTube video with a coach from his coaching community who was Kariwampoling on an RV. And he's like, oh yeah, it's a thing that people do.
I know.
And it doesn't mean that there's not negative. It doesn't mean that there's not negative times. I don't want to paint it in too positive. Like, you get lonely, you get whatever, but it's overall, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah. Well, for people who are watching this, I've put the QR code up on the screen. So if you scan that, you will go directly to the profile of Mihai. I think that's interesting to even just look at. Every time when we do this, Monday, the next Monday, so it's now Friday 28th. So next Monday, the episode will be live on on the well-known platforms. Also, the post will be on the blog of Coachdotme. And for me, it was a wonderful, introduction of how you organize life, how you think about life, how you think about the total connected life, but also the part of the spiritual, about listening to your inner voice, listening to yourself, and not just going with decisions from the brain, but also from what's here. I have to do so that people can see where I'm pointing to. I think that is just great, and I think it's totally aligned with how I think and feel. And I think if we go, I should say, I feel if we go to the future, this is what's necessary for people to look at life more complete, not just selfish of just how I feel, but also how everything else I'm connected with, and how everything in the world is at the moment. That's everything has to do a lot with not just working from the mind, but just starting with yourself, your inner self, right? So the being part. So thank you for that, Mihai. Is there anything that you need to add? Just anything that you feel that's missing out?
Well, just a response to the last thing you were saying about, I feel like you were kind of trying to name selfishness and unselfishness, and I think I love the idea that simple truths have an opposite that is false, but a deep truth, its opposite can be another deep truth. So some version of it's good to be selfish and it's good to be unselfish, I think both qualify. And what kind of happens is sort of the more you surrender into life to spirit, the more you become fully yourself. This is what the readings, and mentors that I have are saying. So I think I would sort of want to I wouldn't want to encourage people. I think it's important to avoid being selfish. I would just want them to be like intelligently selfish, where they're actually feeling into what their deeper self wants. And I believe that sort of quote unquote selfishness, self-fullness is what somebody might call it, would actually end up benefiting the world and not just themselves.
That is a great addition. Thank you very much. So for you guys watching right now, or gals, we will be back next week, same time, same place. So 9 a.m. Central or 4 p.m. Central European time. So I'm looking forward to see you then again. Thank you, Mihai.
Thank you, Arno.